Welcome back to the Squarespace Entrepreneur Show. I'm here with Nick and Hannah Ippolito of SquareKicker. I'm excited to have them on today because I had a chance to chat with them early in the SquareKicker trajectory, and it's been a couple of years now. So I'm really excited to hear how things have grown with them, and share some insights with you, both in terms of what you can do with SquareKicker, but also just if you have plans on creating something for the Squarespace platform, whether it's a plugin or extension of some kind. I think they'll have some great insights to share with us today. So without any further ado, Nick and Hannah, if you don't mind introducing yourself and giving us just the, the short version of how you got on the show.
Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here. Like you said, we connected really early on in the piece for SquareKicker, and it was hugely encouraging to us, that first conversation we had. It certainly spurred us on in our ambitions here. So we really appreciate your time. But yeah, so like Omari said, we are Nick and Hannah Ippolito. We're a husband-wife founding team. And we have started SquareKicker, which is a no-code design and animation extension for Squarespace websites.
Yep. I'll introduce myself as well. I'm Nick. And first of all, Omari, thanks for having us on the show as well. It's been really cool. I've been kind of admiring your work even before SquareKicker, just being inspired by you and the work you're doing and
Awesome.
The community you've built. So it's quite cool to, I guess, officially be on your podcast. I've been listening to it for so long. It's kind of a surreal to be here. So yeah, thanks for having us. So how did we get here on this podcast? Well, essentially, I'm essentially a web designer, self-taught coder, and just, as I said earlier, just in the Squarespace community, hustling it. Was it 5 to 9 is the hustle for Squarespace, and that's what I was doing, and eventually kind of stumbled upon this idea of making websites for clients over and over again, and then so the problem that we're looking at trying to solve is Squarespace is an awesome platform. You get to create not custom websites, but beautiful websites really easily, which is why designers love it so much. But to do anything custom requires custom code because there's no other options out there. So that allowed me to kind of find a trajectory of using custom code to the point where I was using it so much that I wanted to share it with other people, and looking around what everyone else is doing, they're just sharing custom code, and thought that's still a bit of a learning curve. And so as we kept thinking about ways to solve this problem, we kind of ended up with SquareKicker, and kind of launched probably a year and a half ago now.
I love it. So I'm always curious how people get into, whether it's web design, but specifically like Squarespace web design, right? Because Squarespace web design is a little different. Like you said, you're working with a platform that is built for DIY consumer base, but there's still some challenges with it. But bring me back a little bit further in time to like how you got into web design. Was this something that you were always doing professionally, or was there something else and then you just cut over to this?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. And I feel like the more I listen to entrepreneurs who are in the Squarespace world, they are all on the same journey as I was. But personally, I guess it starts with me as kind of a self-taught web designer, thinking that websites were pretty cool and that someday maybe I'd like to make them for a living, because I was kind of doing them on the side for various hobbies and projects. And I didn't know what platform to use at the time, of course. So you try everything. You try the WordPress, the Shopify, the Squarespace, the Wix, the Weebly's, the Dreamweavers, everything you get your hands on, just to expose yourself with all the tools. And I found it pretty quickly, all the things I wanted to do that were in my head, I couldn't accomplish because there was no option. There was no visible drag and drop thing. And so I found WordPress the easiest solution, because of course there's like a bajillion plugins that you can just use. But the issue with those plugins is they're all third-party managed. And when they break, you spend more of your time doing DevOps and fixing broken code than actually designing anything. So I fell out of love with WordPress pretty quickly. But then when someone eventually encouraged me, they said, look, just learn how to code. You're going to save all your headaches trying to use all these no-code tools. I'm like, oh, fine. So I took up the opportunity, went to codeacademy.com, signed up for a free tutorial on how to do HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Like, cool. I feel like Neo in the Matrix. I know Kung Fu. And so I can do this, right? So I jumped on the website. So I I could just custom code some stuff in here. And I ended up falling in love with Squarespace, not because they had so many features, but because it was just so easy to use. It was really intuitive. And I didn't have to worry about backing up my site, doing updates, security updates, SSL certificates, everything just worked. And so it's such a great platform for that. And I think a lot of your listeners obviously will have that same experience about, falling in love with Squarespace because it's so easy and visible to use. But the coolest part about Squarespace that I love is they give you this option to add custom code. And then that just opened up a whole door of, well, if I can have the simplicity of Squarespace and add custom code, like I've got the dream world, like I could do anything. Yeah. And so when I've learned some CSS and JavaScript and things, I just started not hacking Squarespace, but just adding those extra layers of customization to the Squarespace platform. And because I couldn't actually break the website because I wasn't in the back end, I could just feel free to practice, try things out, see what happened. And it was like a learning ground for me to figure out how code works and interact with it on the Squarespace site instantly. Yeah. And each website that I started to create became a new challenge of what else could I do? How else could I make this more interesting? And I wasn't using code plugins or copy and paste stuff. I was just practicing my own ideas out. And to the point where after a while, most of the websites I were making were unrecognizable to be a Squarespace site because I was so custom. I was customized to the point where I could eventually make any website I wanted to on Squarespace with enough creativity and custom code. So that's kind of how I fell into the Squarespace platform and ended up just designing solely for Squarespace.
That's a super deep dive. That's more than a fall. But it definitely reminds me of how I got into coding with Squarespace. I wasn't doing it outside of a platform. It was like, all right, I've got a problem here that I need to solve, and all right, now I'll learn, the code that I need to solve it. But I think it's really fascinating that Squarespace served as a sandbox for you to both develop the skill and then level it up to where other people don't have to if they don't want to. So it's chasing your passion in order to make life a little bit easier for others on the other side, which big fan of that. Hannah, what's your professional story getting into web design and this type of thing?
My professional story is completely irrelevant to anything on the web. So I'm by trade a fashion designer. Okay. I was then working as a photographer. So we also have 3 kids. So I was part-time photographer, full-time mum. And kind of watching Nick go along this little web design journey. And I guess we have always kind of run our businesses side by side, but never together before. But I remember Nick kind of, I think I came home one day and Nick's sitting on the couch and he's like, I think I want to learn how to code. And I was kind of like, sure, like whatever. It seems like the weirdest thing to want to do, but you go for it. And I guess watching him and kind of listening and nodding and smiling as he tells me his real interesting code stories. And then kind of getting slowly pulled into this world and obviously, jumping into this business where we are now fully immersed and I can look at CSS and kind of understand a little of what it's saying and relate a little bit to that world. But, the journey of SquareKicker and kind of how we got here was really out of the pandemic. We were both running our solo businesses, being a photographer, obviously New Zealand went into a big lockdown and no one was going anywhere, let alone having a professional photographer come into their home with their babies or weddings. And that all dropped off. And similar with Nick's web design work, everyone just kind of put all the stuff on pause. And so we just took a bit of a step back and went, okay, what are we going to do? We've got this time. New Zealand was in a full lockdown for 4 weeks, aside from homeschooling our children, which was another adventure that I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. We kind of went, what are we going to do, professionally? And so that's where Nick went, I've been playing with this idea of kind of bottling, what Nick just described with his journey in Squarespace of going, I want to be able to create all of these amazing designs on this incredible foundation that Squarespace provides and just leveraging that. And so we kind of took a few of those little snippets and within a couple of weeks we had created this. And Nick was getting more and more excited about the idea of what SquareKicker could offer to empower designers. That excitement kind of buzzed and a couple of weeks in we went, this has some serious potential. And we were both really excited about where it could go. And so I shut down my business and we got a second mortgage on the house and we went, let's go for it, boots and all. So I kind of came into the code world kicking and screaming, and now just absolutely love it. I love kind of being able to bottle all of that up and offer it to designers and really empower them in their businesses.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of parallels and overlaps there. Bring me into 2020. I mean, there are a lot of people who started businesses around that time. Were there any unique challenges that you think you faced, or any perhaps things that made you a little bit more prepared to go into it? Like,
well, the interesting thing is I got really busy just before the pandemic, just with my own freelancing business. I was making websites only on Squarespace, and then obviously dabbling in Shopify as well. So I had a lot of work. Other agencies around me that I had good relationship with were just firing work towards me, and that was awesome, except for when I couldn't actually do 20 websites in a week. So I was like, right, I can't officially do this anymore. So we went hunting and found another web developer who was also freelancing. So he was more on the development side. I was more on the design side, but we kind of had to overlap code side together. So he was, that spectrum was really complementary. So I had this idea of like, hey, this thing, which I called SquareKicker, I didn't know what it was going to do yet, but I kind of thought it was going to have some sort of relation, was always in the back of my mind. But I thought I needed a developer to help me out making websites. But when we have downtimes, we can work on this pipe dream about, what this could look like. And so we took on this developer, and his name's Rowan, and he's, thinks completely out of the box, which is super cool. So we worked really well together on a few websites. And of course, the pandemic hit, and I was like, oh no, I'm going to pay someone else money that we don't have work for. What are we going to do? That's right. We'll work on this crazy thing I had in my idea about SquareKicker. And so we're all kind of already leveled up to the point where we were stocked with talent and with an idea. And so we just leveraged that month or so of just doubling down on, let's see if we can make these next 4 weeks count. And I guess out of that kind of lockdown that we had in New Zealand, we were kind of into that idea of, we'll just have some sort of sellable product. We didn't know how big or exciting it was going to be, but we thought if we can sell something, so some sort of recurring revenue on the side that we can keep websites going, that's the dream, right? So we have downtimes like this, we can keep our business afloat. And my workmate Rowan, he spent trying to figure out, can we make our own UI inside of Squarespace? And we had a few ideas. We traded back and forth. And then over Easter weekend, he sat in a hammock with a Chromebook coding away, going, I've gotten this idea. I wonder if I can get this thing to work. And he went so overboard. I think he spent 40 hours in a weekend smashing out this idea. And then at the start of the week, he says, Nick, I've kind of done something cool. Do you want to see what it is? And so he opened up the Zoom and shared some screens, and proof of concept was, a little UI that was floating inside of a Squarespace platform, which, that's cool. But then the fact that when you hit save, it wrote code for you and stuffed it in the code injection, I was like, man, if you can do that, my eyes just were like, boom, like we can code anything on the planet that we want with this type of concept. So that's when we knew we had something amazing. And we thought it didn't look pretty at all. It was just like this tiny little thing was a rocket ship, and you click on it and it didn't look pretty, but the fact that it worked was amazing and genius. And that kind of set us up for, I guess, dreaming of how big, what could this look like? What could we do with this thing? And I guess, as Hannah said, that's when we took out a second mortgage and thought, all right, let's give this everything we've got. And you only live once. We're young. We can bounce back. Let's just smash it.
I love it. What was that like period between the time you got the prototype and you're like, oh yeah, this is it. This is going to change the game, to like bringing it public and sharing it with the world? Like, how long was that?
It was busy. It was about 6 months between kind of that prototype and actually releasing the first tool. And it was an incredibly busy and an incredibly kind of scary and exciting time. There's obviously diving into a business like this at the best of times is pretty intimidating, but certainly with a family and a pandemic and going like, we're really banking on this. I hope it's really great. But just, we had so many great opportunities to talk with other web designers and kind of, share this idea with them and people like yourself that we connected with and went, here's this kind of general idea we've got and we think it's great, but will it land? And so we had a lot of really encouraging conversations during that time. And so when we actually hit that first beta out the door, and saw the response from people, it was just amazing. And the product that we released then compared to what is available now with SquareKicker is incredibly tiny. And I think I will forever be grateful for the first 100, 200 designers that jumped in there and kind of joined us on that journey, because we have up until this point been able to bootstrap the company, which has been amazing and given us a lot of control to be able to leverage off the feedback that designers are giving us and keep building into the tools that they want and being able to have a really free flow on our development there.
I mean, even though it took 5 or 6 months to get this little thing into a package that we could actually ship, there's been 5 years of being a part of that Squarespace community, looking what people are trying to ask, what we were trying to ask. And I was in Facebook groups and forums and bookmarking and saving all the things that everyone wanted to collect. So I was collating years worth of content that people were asking. And so it actually came time to making a product that would actually allow those things to be possible without technical barriers. It was kind of like open up the binder of all the things we wish we could have created and prioritizing those things. And the hard part was actually done. Not the hard part. The easy part was actually coding. The coding is actually, funny enough, the easiest part of this challenge. We don't spend a lot of time on the coding. Like the hardest part about this project was the planning. Was actually we had whiteboards out. Like we have a text tool. We took a week or 2 weeks to plot out what was going to go in that text tool, whiteboard the whole thing out, think about what kind of slider was going to be intuitive. So the part of the process that took the longest was planning out what we were going to do, how it was going to work, the most intuitive way of doing it. And then the coding was just like the easiest part. It was like, that was the easiest part. And then also how we were going to protect this so it wasn't able to be, ripped off and shared and used and abused and broken. And we had a lot of planning around how we were going to do that. Once we figured out how, the coding was actually relatively straightforward. And we got another developer who just got made redundant during COVID, and he worked across the road, and he came and joined our team, and he developed an API and a backend system and all the things that I don't understand whatsoever at all. And so without that component, SquareKicker would have just been this front-end language that you can copy and paste anywhere, it would work. But with this really nice, sophisticated, modern, state-of-the-art kind of technology, we're able to release SquareKicker as a piece of software, not just a bit of as a plugin. So I think that was the determining factor of we need all these things to happen after all this R&D. And then once we kind of planned it, it just rolled out the door really quickly.
Yeah. You just said something that I think is a golden key for anyone listening. And it is the 5 years you spent gathering and collecting information and being who you're ultimately serving now. And I think that intimate experience of being your customer allows you to serve your customer, better than anyone else, because you're catering to yourself. But it is going that distance of like, all right, putting myself in a space, whatever it is, and like growing roots, really and truly, because that's what you're doing. You're growing roots, and then when it comes time to sprout, you're kind of sturdier than it might seem above ground, and I love that. I think that lesson could be transported into any niche. It's not an overnight success. There are years that go into it, but the fact that you enjoy the process of like struggling with something. If you could find something, I'm on my soapbox right now because you've given me a lot of material. If you could find something that you enjoy struggling with, oh man, I think that's the best, because most people, we don't enjoy struggling with stuff. So, and we're willing to pay to not struggle with things. So if you enjoy the struggle, then you're going to get paid at the end of it. So yeah, I love all of that. Is there anything that you've learned, since launching SquareKicker? I remember when we spoke, you guys were playing with pricing, and I'm sure you've tweaked that since, 2020. How have you, what have you learned from that on the pricing side, launching a new software product, playing with pricing, like what have you learned there?
Yeah, I wrote something down because I was thinking around what have we actually learned, and I was thinking about all the different stuff that's in the last year and a half, and I think it all boils down to just ship things early. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have ideas that you're not really well thought out yet, and the worst idea you can have is to hold on to it and wait till you've kind of refined everything down to the latest T, because as soon as you do that, the time is gone from, the excitement, the prototypes, the market, everything's moved so fast. And so it's just having those ideas and putting your pricing out, putting your code out, putting your UI out, your branding out, and then you refine it as you go, because you need feedback from people to refine it, and you can't do that on your own. So I think the biggest thing we learned is, at MVP, we could have sat on SquareKicker for another 2 years and then just released all the things we wish we had, and all the refining, all the market research, all the R&D, but we just took it and we threw it out there and we just saw what happened. And that allowed us to get feedback instantly. And then we refined the right ideas instead of the assumed ideas. So that has been really beneficial. And we have acquired a lot of technical debt to do that, that we had to park and say, for the next 2 months, we need to go backwards and tidy up all the loose ends that we kind of went the quick and dirty way. Now that we're established, we kind of go back and rebuild some of those foundations, and then gives us a stronger platform to bungee jump off the next kind of shotgun to the next unknown world.
Yeah, I love that.
I think I remember the conversation we had about pricing, just to specifically dive into that, because I remember at the time we were sitting there going we don't really know what we're doing. We've just made up this company and feeling really insecure. And you were just just charge anything. This idea was great. You can totally go for it. And that was so encouraging to hear. And we actually haven't changed the pricing since we released it. I think we released with the 2 packages, the basic and designer. And since then we have added a pro in the middle of that. And then also an agency on top. And I guess that was probably our biggest surprise, was how many people wanted to use this across their businesses. And we're happy to embed it into their business workflow, to the point where we had to create a new agency plan for people that were really pumping it into their entire company. And so I guess for anyone else that's kind of maybe doing what we are doing, or looking at creating their own product, the same advice you gave us: be confident in what you're offering. If you've done the work and you've done the research and you've got those roots grown, and you really understand that problem, then you'll be well positioned to charge what you need to. You've got the value in the product. And that was really great advice that you gave us, and certainly something we still hold on to, of the, your niche, what you've got is good, so value it well.
Yeah, I love that. And the iterative approach, I like how you describe it, Nick. What I was seeing visually was if you're going through uncharted territory, at first you're just trying to get through, right? So you're not making too many tracks, but after you've gotten through and you're trying to go back, then you can clear out the way and clean things up and make it better for the next journey around. And you're going to have a lot easier time. And I've found that to be my experience as well. Is there's a period of charging forward, then there's a period of letting go, and then there's a period of all right, now I can go back again. And it's really a cyclical, the more I talk about it, the more I'm it's like breathing in and out. It's a very, it's a very natural process. But seeing it on a macro scale of okay, how do I run a business? Okay, I have to there's a rhythm to it. And I think you guys have a really lovely rhythm that you picked up. Another thing I want to bring up, because a lot of our guests, or at least this season, have been husband and wife teams. And so what have you found with that dynamic? Right now, me and my wife are where you guys were a couple of years ago, right? So my wife's the photographer and she's an artist. So we're kind of side by side, I have my work hours, she has her work hours. What is that like when you merge it again? You're all right, we're,
Yeah, we talk about this all the time, because I think, you hear the stories of it going really, really well, or really, really terribly. And I think we're fortunate enough for it to go really, really well. We really enjoy working together. And I think we're both quite strong, kind of visionary type people. We love seeing the big picture and seeing what can happen, and getting really excited about an idea that we're working on. So I think the fact that we can do that together, and it's not us being resentful of each other working till midnight, because we do that on a very regular basis on our couch. It's very romantic.
Yeah.
You know, I think the fact that we can do that together and enjoy that work together is actually a huge strength. And
Yeah.
as far as our kind of skill sets go, we're quite different in our actual hands-on keyboard skills. And so knowing where our strengths are and being able to go, no, this is way better on your side of the desk, or this is way better on my side of the desk, and not having any tension of trying to pull that back and forth, but just really understanding, you know, where each other's strengths are and allowing that to become part of the rhythm of how you run the business.
Yeah, I mean, because we're both entrepreneurs. We've started our own businesses, we run our own businesses, and to use kind of not this is marriage counseling, but there's a lot of face-to-face interaction when you're a couple and you're married and you're doing life together. But then, you know, working with kids and when the business, you're doing a lot of kind of back-to-back stuff because you got your own things you're working out. So, you know, we're splitting up, we're dividing, we're conquering. So there's a lot of back-to-back action. But there's not a lot of shoulder-to-shoulder interaction because you're not working on the same thing together. A lot of you just back-to-back. And I think when you don't have, there's so much back-to-back, you basically go small bit of face-to-face and then mostly back-to-back. But now that we're actually working on the same thing together, both our energies aren't together. There's a lot of shoulder-to-shoulder interaction, and which makes up for the lack of face-to-face interaction that we may not have because we're so busy all the time that actually
date night's gone way out the window.
Yeah. So we kind of capitalize on the fact that we have lots of, like, I guess, opportunities to work together. And because our strengths are so, you know, complementary, that we leverage on that quite heavily. And now that we know, you know, as co-founders, you kind of, you know, try to figure out who can offset your skill set. I can't think of anyone better than my wife, who already knows me really well and who does everything that I do poorly amazing, and vice versa. So that's really great. I mean, we have this metaphor of I'm always up in the sky, thinking, dreaming, visionary, just flying away. And Hannah's on the ground being the realist. And so when she's holding on to me, we're kind of lifting each other off and we're going somewhere together. So I think it's a really cool way we kind of picture our relationship.
I love that, guys.
It's good fun.
Yeah. So I've been doing, the first guest I had this season turned the tables on me, and they asked me a few questions that I wasn't expecting. So I'm going to give you the opportunity, if there's anything that you want to turn the table on me and ask, you can do that now. Anything comes to mind?
Cool. Yeah. I mean, my first question is, what are you excited about in the Squarespace ecosystem at the moment?
So I'm excited about this podcast. That's why I'm doing it. The thing that I've learned now, for 8 years, we're going into 8 years, and it's just community, right? So like, for most of my Squarespace career, I'm like in my own world, in the real world. And then I'm kind of like, you know, a virtual. Basically, what I'm saying is being able to talk with folks who I consider colleagues. We're in the same space. We're catering to the same audience. This, like, it makes me feel like I'm a part of something. And I know that it does that for the community as well. So I'm excited about continuing to build community in a way that I perhaps wasn't as confident or sure in initially. I knew it was something I had to do. But as I've done it and as I've grown, I'm like, all right, it's kind of like what we're saying. Like, I went the first 8 years just willy-nilly. I'm like, all right, what do I like? You like doing the podcast, go back and do the podcast. So I'm going back, doing the podcast, clean it up, you know, do it in a way that's like a higher level than you did it before, and rinse and repeat. So yeah, that's the answer to that.
Cool.
Since there's two of us, we get two questions then. Is that how it works?
Yeah,
All
of
right,
course,
so
of course.
This is kind of a hard question because lots of words are really easy for me anyhow. So maybe one word is actually harder. But if you had to summarize your entire kind of entrepreneur journey up to this point now, what word would you use to kind of summarize what you've learned? One of the biggest things you've learned.
It's a P word. Yeah, and it's either patience or persistence.
Why is that?
Going into it, I was very impatient. I needed it to happen in 6 months. That was my perpetual time frame, and I think that was because in school and in my professional career before that, I was always on kind of like a rotation thing. So it was either like some, like a fast paced, like academic curriculum where you're in and out, or professionally, I was in like a rotational thing where it's one role, one role. So like I had built up this expectancy that like, yeah, I'm supposed to like just blow up in a year. Like that's what's supposed to happen. And then that didn't happen. And then I'm like, all right, well, it's still supposed to happen. And then it didn't happen. And so like, I think that's where the persistence came in, is like, all right, you just got to keep going. And eventually I learned patience through that. So I learned, all right, you have to be patient and give things time. There needs to be time for those roots to grow. All of the new, all of the, like all of the accelerated stuff I had grown up on, I learned in the real world. Things are a little slower. And so like I got into a slower pace, which I happen to be turns out I'm a slower individual anyway. So now things are better because I'm patient and a little bit more persistent.
That's fantastic. I feel like I just listened to like a daily word devotion from my word to meditate on. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean that, you mentioned actually the future. That's where we're going. Eventually we're gonna have some daily word, and we're gonna, elevate the community through some inspiration. But till we get there, this is where we're at now.
It's good stuff.
Thank you guys for being on the show. It was great chatting with you. Is there anything you want to close with? Anything you want to share specific to SquareKicker or just generally?
Only that we obviously we really love the Squarespace community, and our whole journey has been, how do we empower Squarespace designers? Like that's what we're about. We're not necessarily even about trying to make a bunch of money. Like our whole journey is, how do we prevent people like me struggling to get into the career and the business and making websites? How do we empower those people so that more creative ideas, more creative designs, more creative thoughts can actually get out there without any barriers? So I think that's what we're all about. And so I guess kind of looking forward to that. We've got a very large roadmap. I know it's only been a year and a half now, but we've done an awful lot, and we're downstairs just whiteboarding out the next 12 months. And we've got some really exciting things coming. Nothing we can kind of share or go into detail, but maybe in a year's time, we could have another chance to catch up and talk about some exciting things. But I guess that roadmap for us is, we just want to create not necessarily more just tools for that process to empower people, but just a whole different way of looking at how to launch, grow, and scale a web designer business on Squarespace. So yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff coming. So looking forward to it.
That sounds really good. Yeah.
It is really good. It's going to be awesome. And I used to, like you mentioned, that community factor. And I think that's such an important piece of Squarespace, and something that they're doing a really great job of as a company, is kind of building that. And I think the more we can support that, the better. So if there's any designers listening to this, or anyone else creating their own products that want to reach out to us and have a chat about our journey, or maybe an idea you have, or something you want us to include in SquareKicker, anything that we can kind of help to build on what is available, we'd just love to hear from anyone.
Awesome. Happy again to have you guys on the show and to hear your story, and your offer is great. So anyone out there listening, definitely take them up on that offer. And check out SquareKicker.com. This is the premier no-code tool for Squarespace.